An Ogryn in a Pony's World. Written by an odd hermit. Chapter 1. Dropping in. Alarms blared their shrill scream as red lights flashed, the metal of the ship groaning like a dying whale. Within a long corridor of the ship ran a group of men. At the forefront was an absolute Goliath, towering above his smaller fellows considerably. The behemoth of a being spun on his wheels as his smaller counterparts ran past him, raising a large gun to bear, firing into a horde of malformed creatures that were chasing them. The Ogryn laughed as he watched them drop like flies.
Lug! Get your giant terrier in here!
The man shouted from behind him, leaning out of the doorway into the side of the corridor. The lug in question turned to look at him, confused, blinking dumbly as he pointed towards the oncoming horde of mutants with very little, if any, urgency. Like he was pointing out a neat bird he just saw.
"But, Dawn,"
Lug whined.
"Whole lot of beasties."
Lug watched as Dawn scowled deepened considerably, his features filling with fresh irritation. He opened his mouth to shout once again, the ship rocking.
Yes, you big lout, that's why we're leaving!
Lug huffed in indignation. There were so many of them, and they were so tightly packed. It'd be so easy just to mow them down with his ripper gun. No fuss, no muss. So terribly simple to just clobber his way through them.
If you charge into that horde, so help me!
Dawn began furiously as he saw Lug turn towards the horde with anticipation, club raised. Lug locked eyes with the man as he turned to address him, and almost withered once he saw the anger burning in them. It reminded him of his papa. His papa was scary. He didn't like his papa. He lowered his club and trundled his way inside the room, giving the horde of monsters a forlorn look as he shot off a few more rounds into the mass of mutated flesh.
"Okay,"
said Lug, rather morosely. The blast door to the outside corridor clanged loudly as it closed behind him, the sound filling the relatively silent room like a death knell. Dawn clapped his hands together and began moving towards a large drop pod, dragging Lug along with him by the wrist. Of course, he didn't have the strength to drag Lug anywhere, but Lug just followed along anyway. Lug was good at following.
Alright lads, strap in. We're nearing the warp tear, and I'd much rather take my chances out in the vacuum of space.
The other men in the room were filing into drop pods as Dawn sat Lug down in one of the larger ones, strapping him in like a mother would for her child in a vehicle. Though, despite the large size of the pod, it was still somewhat cramped for the Ogryn, and he didn't much like cramped spaces. Not one bit. He shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable.
"It's real small in here,"
Lug said nervously. Dawn, who had just finished strapping in, paused for a moment, his seemingly permanent scowl softening as he looked up at the nervous Ogryn, and in an uncharacteristic show of softness, he gave Lug's knee a few comforting pats. The gesture brought a small, silly smile to Lug's face.
You'll be alright, Lug.
After those parting words, the man closed the drop pod door and got into his own. The countdown for the drop began as the rest of the doors closed, filling Lug with a sense of dread. He always hated the feeling of falling. As the countdown was reaching its end, the ship's intercom screeched to life as a commanding voice shouted,
"Brace yourselves! We've entered the warp!"
And like some cruel twist of fate, the timer hit 0. Lug's heart tightened with fear as he felt the similar feeling of being launched into space, but it was so much worse. His drop pod was thrown to and fro as the chaotic energies of the warp tried to tear it and him apart. All the while, Lug's eyes were clamped shut as his life flashed in his mind like a tape reel. His frown widened with his brow furrowed even further as he realized how bleak his life had been. A broken family, the day he had been sent to war, how mean his commissar was. It felt to him like such a strong sense of longing despite the perilous situation he was in. He wished dearly that his life had been a happier one. But Lug was never that lucky. And when he felt the metal walls of the drop pod begin to give away, a single tear rolled down his cheek as he awaited the inevitable. He had heard stories of people being eviscerated in the warp, painful and slow, not like the suffocation of space. And now, he too would be added into that long line of tragic tales. Or at least, that's what he thought. Not that thinking did him much good. He braced as the pod was racked with an especially strong blow, and then a second that blasted from below. His eyes were practically glued shut as he awaited the painful death the warp was going to grant him. But, after a good 5 minutes of waiting, it was silent. The drop pod was no longer in the process of being tossed about, and the crackling energies of the warp no longer assaulted the wells of his metal coffin. Lug tentatively opened his eyes, expecting to see a terrible daemon waiting right in front of him, ready to gobble him up, just like his big sister said would happen if he didn't eat his vegetables. But nothing. He saw the battered interior of the pod, and, to his surprise, sunlight filtering through the small, cracked window. Did he somehow pass through the warp unharmed? He laughed in disbelief, relief beginning to fill his terrified bones. Lug unstrapped himself and gave the door of the pod a few stern kicks, sending it flying by the third. He quickly stepped out of the claustrophobic space, and soon found himself blinded by the light that surrounded him. Holding up a calloused hand to his eyes, he slowly let them get acclimated to the brightness of his surroundings, and when they did, he lowered his hand, letting out a small gasp as the new world around him came into a breathtaking focus. Rolling pastures of green grass at his 12 o'clock, and a forest that stretched into the horizon at his 8. He was whipping around, trying to take all the signs of the lushness of it all. Birds fitted by him, singing a lifting song as they went. Butterflies danced their gentle waltz along the flowers as he watched with slack-jawed awe. Lug's gaze was caught on a tall mountain, and what seemed like a kingdom that rested upon its immovable cliffs. White castles stabbed into the skies with their purple-topped towers. It was like he was in one of the fairy tale stories that his big sister always read to him in his childhood. He had been on a lot of tours and a lot of missions, but none had brought him to a planet that was so vibrant and beautiful. Not to mention the sense of safety, of peace, of harmony that settled in his soul. Lug felt tears roll down his cheeks and into his sideburns as he stood there amongst the grass and butterflies, utterly enraptured by it all. The others may have laughed and joked, calling him stupid and dull, and that's likely true, but that didn't mean he couldn't comprehend the soft, gentle beauty of the landscape. Wiping the tears from his cheeks and inhaling through a congested nose, he shook himself out of the daze he had been in. He remembered what his big sister always told him. Big Ogryns don't cry. And Lug was a big Ogryn. Lug needed to find out where he was and contact his superiors somehow. Don wasn't going to be happy that he got separated from the group. He then began lumbering back to his very damaged drop pod. It was a miracle he had the pod survive the landing, considering how beat up it was. He reached in and grabbed the communication device that was rather small in his hands and tried to turn it on. Nothing. Not even a crackle of static. Lug tried it a few more times before noticing the soft orange glow coming from inside the pod. He threw the device to the side in irritation, snorting as he did so. He turned to the glow, and horror soon filled his features as he saw a small fire spreading across the inside of the pod, making its way to the dripping fuel pipe. Lug immediately turned and sprinted towards the forest, scooping up an unwitting bunny rabbit that was just lazily grazing on a patch of grass. The rabbit in his hand squeaked in his cupped hands, biting in his fingers to no avail. Diving into a bush at the edge of the forest, he curled up into a ball as an explosion rocked the once tranquil area, sending shrapnel everywhere like a giant grenade. The rabbit in his hands went quiet at the sound, and he could feel the poor thing shivering like wild. He'd never seen one of these critters before, but he'd be damned if he let an innocent, fluffy little ball of brown get blown to bits by his drop pod. Lug groaned as he sat up, his ears ringing as he went upright. He opened his hands and set the rabbit down as he and the little bunny surveyed the destruction. The explosion had left a deep crater where the drop pod once was. The deep dark gouges in the earth could be found where shrapnel was sent flying. Lug pursed his lips as he sucked air through his teeth, his face tightening into a wince. He then looked towards the rabbit to see if it was all right, and found it staring at him. Despite the fear he saw, the intelligence in the eyes startled him, and he thought for a moment that he could see the sparkle of a thank you glimmering in its gaze. It hopped closer to him and tried to wrap grateful fuzzy paws around his arm, nuzzling his wrist. His heart absolutely melted at this display. Lug then picked up the bunny gently, giving it a gentle scratch around the ears, which it seemed to love, and he chuckled softly.
Huh. Sister always said I was good with animals. I think I'll name you, Daffy, 'cause you was chewing on a daffodil when I rescued ya.
He rattled on happily, the rabbit giving a happy squeak as he scratched a good spot. He looked around as he gave the bunny scritches, and he needed to get a move on and find a settlement. Judging by this planet's star, it wasn't even midday yet, and the shock of recent events was beginning to catch up on him, instilling a deep weariness in his muscles as the adrenaline left him. Maybe finding a settlement could wait. He was dead tired after today's excitement. He trudged back to the open field and walked past the large crater, Daffy now sitting upright on his shoulder. The little rabbit was looking at the giant hole that scorched the once lush dirt, and Lug could swear he saw a little grimace stretch across its furry features.
Nasty business, drop pauses. Nasty,
said Lug, clicking his tongue as he kicked away a piece of shrapnel in his path. After traveling a decent ways away from the crash site and deeper into the pasture, he found a nice hill to lie down on. Daffy hopped down from his shoulders and then onto his chest as Lug got comfortable. He never had many chances like this, and since this was the only chance of reaching his superiors was just blown to bits, and it'd likely be a while before they came looking, he decided he'd take a nice nap. Though as Lug rested there atop the grassy hills, slowly closing his eyes, gently petting a now curled up and sleeping Daffy, he wondered if they'd ever look for him at all. He was just another rake and file soldier, a nameless body that toiled for the war machine that was the Imperium. And if they didn't, well, he was content with that. There we go. I've been looking to add another 40k fix since the Guardsman, and now we got the best boy Lug as our brain protagonist. This series so far is great. Lug is just an Ogryn living his best life, and despite being 40k crossover, there's a whole lot of wholesome in this one. A big shout out to the author, an odd hermit, who is the actual voice for Dawn, a writer and a VA, a more device skill set than I could hope for. That aside, I would like to thank my wonderful Patreons. Thank you my Tier 1 Patreons, Chase Lemaster, Starlight Blaze, Sword Brother and Mordred, which I'm sure likes this, Thine Tiny Equine, Squall Windfeather, Stu Hex, and Rainflicker. My Tier 2 Patreons, Captain Blueshadow, The Animated Ghost, Solus, HKH4, aka Texture, and of course a large thank you to Silent Titan. I appreciate your guys' support so much and it means a lot to me. If you want other ways to support, well, my Ogryn friend here will help you.
Consider leaving a like and a subscribe and a comment down below. The boss appreciates it a lot. Right, boss?
That's right, Lug. Anyways, this has been Firehearth. Have a wonderful day.